We're very pleased to be able to welcome ministers from 4 of the participating states here in the room, and our ambassador from Switzerland is joining us remotely. Unfortunately, our Norwegian colleague was unable to make it, but sends his apologies. With that, I'd like to pass over to our co-host, Mr. Attorney-General from Fiji, to make some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, and Bulawinak, and a good afternoon to all of you, and in particular also to our co-host New Zealand. On behalf of the participants of the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability, or ACTS, I'm delighted to welcome you all. Thank you to New Zealand for co-hosting this important event with us. Our task today is to raise awareness on ACCTS, an agreement between like-minded nations seeking to transform global trade from a source of the carbon emissions behind climate change into a source of the solutions we need in this century. Flows of global trade, from production to transportation and to the consumption of foods and services, are essential to modern economies. This interconnected system puts smartphones in our pockets, food on our tables, beams in our homes, and machinery in our factories. But we know that all of the vessels, freight planes, and delivery trucks on which this system runs and add emissions into our atmosphere. And we know we in the Pacific know better than most that no economy can succeed on a planet that fails. Climate-driven devastation, if left unchecked, could cripple the entire global economy within our lifetime, unspooling centuries of progress to send our societies back to the Stone Age. 6 countries, of course, who are party to this, cannot solve this crisis alone. But we can be the change we seek from the wider world. And we can lend universal appeal to this agreement so that more countries actually join us. But universal appeal should not signal watered-down ambition. We cannot lose sight of our commitment to tackle climate change or compromise on our objectives. We can make our strongest case for climate change as means to improve economic security by working together through this innovative arrangement to mainstream trade into the global climate action campaign. That work starts with us. And what better place to advance policies that can have a global impact on trade, on the environment, climate and sustainability than here at COP26. Please let's remain mindful of the stakes here. A rise in ocean level threatens the very existence of countries like Tuvalu, Kiribati and Marshall Islands. Many of these nations, as well as many low-lying Fijian communities, are already inundated by the rising sea throughout the year, which has washed salt water into agricultural lands and into drinking water sources. And as the world heats and the oceans acidify, vital fish stocks and ecosystems will either leave our waters or die off, putting us on a course for a nightmare future when ever-warming and ever-rising sea washes away Pacific societies. Time is not on our side. Already extreme weather patterns such as severe tropical cyclones and floods are devastating transport and logistics infrastructure and debilitating value chains and export capacity. The combined toll of these storms inflicts millions of dollars worth of damages to the Fijian economy, for example, every year. That's all to say this agreement is being drawn up in a crisis, and I hope to see that sense of urgency drive our discussions. These are not usual times. Our deliberations cannot take place over the usual timeline, and it cannot produce a usual standard trade agreement. ACCTS is not only about enabling market access for goods and services. Our mandate is much wider. This is about how we can address the climate crisis through trade policy. Although there is a nexus between climate change and trade, relatively limited attention has been paid to the role of trade agreements on climate change. This agreement seeks to remedy that failure by looking at transformative solutions in order to meet the commitments of the Paris Agreement. That is why ACCTS intends to help countries meet climate goals by removing tariffs on environmental goods and having binding commitments for environmental services, eliminating distorting subsidies on fossil fuels, and supporting the development of high-integrity eco-labels. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while global trade is a source of emissions, it is also a fundamental part of the solution, as it has the potential to enhance both mitigation and adaptation measures to climate change. Most importantly, we believe that the agreement presents new opportunities to promote trade diversification while transitioning to a low-carbon world. Our major asks at this COP are the same pillars on which this agreement must be built. We must limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, oppose coal mining and eliminated harmful fossil fuels, and increase access to affordable finance to address climate impacts, as well as a dedicated financing mechanism for loss and damage. Trade has a vital role to play in all of that, and the ACCTS can become the means through which we can deliver real solutions for all parties, especially the small island developing states at the front line of the climate change. Countries like Fiji did not cause this crisis, but we are committed to being part of the solution. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Attorney General, Fiji provides a small island developing state perspective to the ACCTS negotiation. In your view, what would you like the ACCTS to achieve?
Thank you. I think my question has actually been answered by everybody else that's spoken before me, but I mean, we in Fiji just passed the Climate Change Act in September of this year, which essentially, requires or puts in law our commitment to reaching net zero emissions, requires us, for example, to have the MPAs, marine protected areas, and we also, of course, requires accountability by the private sector. So the private sector obviously engages in trade. They are the ones who do most of the trade, or 99% of all the trade. So it brings them into the fold. And I think trade, of course, then, will ensure ACCTS will ensure that they also have further accountability. And I think one of the other issues that I wanted to highlight is hopefully through the acts, we get also some preferential sort of trade, policies being put in place for whether it's eco-labeling, whether it's getting products that have met the various standards, that they will get, be able to get into those markets. And for the Pacific Island countries where our ability or the range of products we have to offer for export market is very limited, or we are competing with many other countries. So if we are going to send something, a product, whether it's agricultural produce, etc., that is falling within X, hopefully we'll get preferential treatment. And that's the way it should be, because I think it's critically important for us to be able to escalate the level of awareness, not just in terms of giving nice speeches, but also on a daily trade basis. And you should be rewarded for that. And I think that's what small, island developing states actually do want.
It's evident, Attorney General, that policy space for development considerations is critical for small island developing states in the ACCTS. How can the ACCTS ensure that there is adequate development-related flexibility within the agreement?
I think the, generally when you have trade agreements or free trade agreements, a lot of the developing countries such as SIDS actually miss out, because the issue of there's a lack of actually development clauses in free trade agreements. It does not recognize that there is a need to, for example, have special and differential treatment because of the economies of scale, because of points of difference in terms of, the stages of development, because of cottage industries. So I think we are hoping that the acts will be able to provide a clause, a development clause, which could mean that small and vulnerable countries will be provided with adequate policy space and technical assistance in designing and implementing transitional measures to mitigate the impact of climate change. We've had 13 cyclones since 2016. New Zealand hasn't. If we, for example, we have, 1/3 of the value of our GDP gets wiped off within 36 hours, that needs to be taken into consideration. In the same way, for example, notwithstanding the fact that we are now deemed to be a middle-income country, the World Bank now gives us IDA funds because they've recognized or factored in vulnerability. So I think, the trade agreements needs to be also flexible, apart from the environmental standards, apart from the adherence in respect of the low output of carbon. It also needs to have a development clause built into that too. And that'll be critically important.
Thank you, Attorney General.